Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Strategic Communication Mentored online course webinar number 3. My name is Kristen Mays and I'm Strategic Communication Manager for the Reef Resilience Network and your host for this webinar, along again with my colleague Sherry Wagner. This webinar is brought to you through the support of NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program and will be about 45 minutes long, although for this webinar, we will be a bit more flexible with our time since it's our last webinar. We just want to make sure we've covered the material we need to get through and that your questions have been addressed to the best of our ability. For the webinar, we'll start off with a recap of the previous communication planning steps and what we've done as a group so far. And we'll also check in to see if you have any questions about previous content before we move on. Next, we'll take a deeper dive into creating a summary of your plan with an example. And then you'll hear another example summary from 2 of your fellow classmates. And we'll wrap up with a discussion and a little bit of course wrap up. Like we did during previous webinars, we'll have a few different opportunities for question and answer sessions. There are 2 ways you can ask questions. You can use the question box anytime throughout the webinar to send questions, and we'll keep track of these for the Q&A sessions. Or you can raise your hand during the question session, and we'll take your question during that time. You raise your hand as a reminder by clicking on the small hand icon on the toolbar just to the left of your name. And if you're having any technical difficulties, such as trouble hearing or seeing the slides, you can send us a message via that same question box and we'll try to resolve the issue. So you've seen this a number of times, just super quick reminder of where we are in the process. You begin by identifying your goal and objective, then assess the context for your work and identified your target audience or audiences. And this process included a webinar, quizzes, worksheets, and for some of you, working with a partner. Then we created messages, identified tactics and measures, and began putting all your previous steps or worksheets together into a summary using the summary template provided on reefresilience.org. Now that you've completed all the worksheets and created a summary, we'd just like to do a quick check-in and learn or hear from you about which step or stage in the strategic communication planning process you found the easiest. So we'll give you a second to take that poll there. And G and O is goal and objectives. So your choices there are goal and objectives, context and audience. We went ahead and lumped those together. Messages, messengers and tactics lumped, and then measures or evaluation. Okay, it looks like we can see that on the screen there, but context and audience was the easiest step, followed by goal and objective. Wow, which seems surprising to me. I find that one of the most challenging. Okay, wonderful. And let's just flip that same question and see which step you found the most challenging or most difficult. Okay, messengers and tactics, 60%. Interesting. During our, right now, maybe we can pause quickly, and if anyone wants to comment on that or what they found difficult or ask a question, I'm going to just move to the next slide, but ask a question about any of the content we've covered so far. You can feel free to wait till a later question session. We are going to be diving into looking at what a summary of our plan looks like. But before we moved on, I just want to give an opportunity to address any questions. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. Remember, if you think of something, feel free to jot it down in that question box, and Sherry can save it for us for later. So as I mentioned, we're going to take a deeper dive into creating a summary of the steps you've identified so far. We do this to make sure, we've already said this, but to make sure that they build on one another or complement each other, and to see if anything is missing. A written plan will help you focus your efforts and stay on course, and make it easier to get others involved or engaged in the project. A summary helps you lay out your communications game plan from the very start to the finish. So it's a little silly, but I really encourage you to print it out, maybe blow it up, gather your staff, and share the game plan. And it's a good way to get people working together as a team and excited. I have a few tips for creating your summary. First one is to start writing. Sometimes it can seem a bit daunting. So first tip is to just get those ideas, get the information from your worksheets down on paper into the template. It's okay to leave sections blank when you're starting off, or maybe put a note there as a placeholder, but just get started writing. Be concise, so remember, less is more. This is a high-level document meant to provide a snapshot of what you want to achieve and how you're going to achieve it. So let's not forget that. Once your plan is put together, check in to see if the steps flow into a cohesive plan. So you can ask yourself, does your audience match your objective? Will the messages reach your audience? Will your tactics get your messages to your audience? Will your measures tell you if your strategy is working? So you get the point there, asking those questions to see if there's connection between each of those steps. Then you can consider what you need to move your plan forward. So for example, who needs to see and approve your plan? What resources do you need to secure in order to implement your plan? And is your next first step clear? And then the final one on there is your timeline is critical. Use it to guide your and your colleagues' work. And I'm just going to stress this one for a quick second here. Oops. Because it's really meant to be your game plan. I know I said the summary is your game plan, but it does come down a lot of times to the timeline. It's a good way to manage your time and map out your activities. And so you can really chart out each of the tasks you've identified. You can also chart out other factors that will influence your work, such as maybe a time-consuming event or holiday. One of the easiest ways to do this is to work backwards from the final tactic implementation date. And so that's sometimes how I like to start them. So on the screen here, this is an example from the Resource Media Communications Workbook. And this workbook is a link that's in the resource section. So it's on reefresilience.org on the Create a Summary of Your Plan page. And I'm sharing this to drive home that there are lots of different timeline formats. A simple list like we're going to look at next is fine, but if you and your team prefer visuals, that may be the best way to go. So as a way to help get you going, or perhaps help you refine your summary, we've created an example summary plan based on the fictional Clement Reef atoll that you have heard about throughout the webinars. So I'm going to talk about this now, but we've also posted this example summary. It's a few-page PDF, or I think it's a PDF, on reefresilience.org on that same Create a Summary of Your Plan page. Here's a little screenshot of what it looks like. So feel free to refer to this later for ideas or maybe guidance on format. So we're going to walk through this example together now. And warning, these next slides are pretty wordy. Don't feel like you need to read them. I'm just really trying to show a snapshot of what the actual plan looks like, just to help you think through what your plan could look like in the format. So the summary starts off like the template does that we provided with the background section. So I'm just going to talk through this example and really tell this story to help you get a feel for how your plan could flow. So we're back at Clement Reef Atoll, and this atoll is recognized locally and internationally for its pristine coral reefs, biodiversity, and abundant conch and lobster fisheries. The atoll provides livelihoods for local fishers and food security for two of the communities adjacent to the atoll. Veal, and St. Coral. There are currently 2 marine protected areas, MPAs, within the atoll. These MPAs make up about 15% of the total area of the atoll. Unfortunately, the MPAs are not enough to mitigate a growing human population and unsustainable fishing. And there's a decline in important commercial conch and lobster populations within the atoll. So the actual summary goes on to explain a little bit more. Some of the key points, though, that are included that I wanted to mention, that Clement Environment Group, KEG, plays a critical role in managing human use of the atoll. Oh, if someone accidentally unmuted themselves, I can hear you.
Huh? Yes. Yeah. It's going to take a couple minutes.
Mallory, is that you? I can hear you guys if you're accidentally unmuted. Okay, we'll see. So KEG plays a critical role in managing use of the atoll and activity within the MPAs. And there are 2 community groups, as I mentioned, or 2 communities, Veal and St. Coral, and they fish at the atoll year-round. There are 5 fishing associations within those communities. And some of the challenges noted by KEG that really help are important to note to steer their activities and address barriers. There's an issue with fuel for the outreach vehicle for the staff, and fishing associations aren't always well organized, so it can be tough to work with them. So the goal that they identified for their communications plan is by 2025, increase commercial conch and lobster stocks within Clement Reef Atoll by 25%. They've identified a number of objectives or steps to get them towards that goal, but the one that they're focusing on for their plan is by 2020, engage 30% of fishers from Veal and St. Coral in the decision-making process to establish a new marine protected area. In order to achieve that objective or reach that objective, they are targeting 200 fishers from Veal and St. Coral who use the atoll to fish for conch and lobster. Many of these fishers are members of a fishing association, and there are 5 fishing associations that make up about 1/3 of the fishers from those 2 communities. KEG a couple of years ago conducted a socioeconomic assessment to learn about these fishers, and what they learned, or some of the highlights that they learned, is that there's an increase in the number of fishers, so more fishers over time, continued illegal fishing activities within the protected areas, absence of fishers from decision-making, and a need for supplemental livelihood projects for fishers. They also noted in the plan that potential influential audiences include families, so spouses and children in particular, other well-respected fishers, and community leaders such as religious leaders. In the summary, we also noted the existing research we have to learn from or work with, and what additional research is needed. And you've seen this before, so like you did, we used the message box to develop simple messages about our work that explain the overarching issue, problems that have occurred because of the issue, how our work relates to our audience, the solution, and then the benefits. I probably won't read through the message, but just as a reminder, can use the message box to guide conversations, so to really be those key talking points, to say those 4 main points when you're talking to your audience. Can use it to really drive or develop content for outreach materials. And so in it here, we say that the issue we're here to talk about is unsustainable fishing. This matters because we're seeing scarce or less adult conch and lobster, which really for you means loss of income. Then we'd present the solution and their role in it, and then help them visualize the benefits that they can expect personally once that solution takes place. So in this case, in our summary, we noted that Once, we did this draft of the message box, next we really need feedback on these messages, and we need feedback from colleagues and peers, as well as test audiences, and input from research and evaluation. So once we get all that, then we'll revise the message box accordingly. To identify effective messengers, we considered who our audience respects and who they will listen to. Here are a few of the messengers we plan to start with. And so those two up there are really just staff from our environmental outreach organization. And then we noted respected fishers from those two communities, as well as local church leaders, and then fishing families. As a reminder, the best communication efforts use the most direct tactics. Remember to start with learning how your audience gets information and choose a tactic that reaches them as directly as possible. For example, if you're trying to reach conch fishermen who don't use the internet, a social media campaign will probably not reach them. Instead, a good tactic may be going boat to boat to speak with them directly. So you can see here's a list of tactics we chose to reach fishers who fish at the atoll and try and convince them to get involved in the MPA planning process. I won't read those all, they're in the summary, but they should look familiar. Ideas we've discussed before: recruiting well-respected fishers as messengers, participating in those association meetings, or encouraging fishers to attend advisory council meetings to be involved in the decision-making process, conduct boat-to-boat outreach, so going directly to our audience, and then another one on there, host free movie nights as a way to engage families and reach out to that potential influential audience. And just an important reminder here is just, it is important to select a variety of tactics to engage your audience. We want to engage them multiple times and in multiple places or ways, because repetition can help us break through that information clutter. To measure project success, we aim to have a measurement device for all tactics, just like we asked you guys to do for the worksheets. And we do that to know if our methods are working and if we need to revise them if they aren't. Over time, we will continue to monitor and assess marine resources, such as population status of conch and lobster within and outside the protected area, to know if the new MPA is getting us closer to our goal. But for now, we're just focused on measuring the tactics that we identified. So here are just examples of measures for two of the tactics that were on that previous list. So things that we are considering measuring are number of meetings KEG staff participate in, number of fishers and attendance of the meetings, so those would be outputs, number of new supporters of the MPAs gained through a meeting, that would be an outcome, change in participants' knowledge and support of MPAs, maybe through a survey, number of new fishers who agree to participate in an advisory council, so the decision-making committee, number of informational materials shared. For the boat-to-boat outreach, again, number of informational materials shared, number of interactions, so direct interactions from boat to boat, and then looking at more of those outcome-focused measures, number of fishers who, after the interactions, are aware of the value of MPAs, how they can get involved, and then the number of new fishers who agree to participate in the advisory committee. Here's just a quick snapshot of what the timeline looks like. It still needs to be fleshed out a bit more, but it's a great start. So where we could put a date down, we did. We sometimes just put a month or maybe two to say this is kind of where in the timeline this activity should fit in. We're really using some of these as placeholders. We still also need to assign roles for all the tasks, but we really wanted to wait until we shared it with the KEG staff and then assign those roles together. Once we completed the whole summary, put all those worksheets and pieces together, we realized we really need to learn more about our target audiences. So we prioritized conducting focus groups, and you can see that that's up front there. And once we get more information, so once we learn more about those audiences, our audiences, we'll try to segment them further so that it's easier to create focused tactics and messages for them. And then we'll use that information to end the message box to further refine our messages. So for me personally, I find the summary most helpful to be able to identify gaps and challenges in my work or my project, so it can be really helpful. We do have another example, but before I move on, I just want to pause and see if anyone has any questions or comments about this example. It is hypothetical. Sometimes it can be, hopefully it's enjoyable to work through a hypothetical example, but I find it helpful just to see how all the pieces kind of fit together in a plan. Okay, I don't see any comments coming in, so I'm gonna just move on in interest of time. And let's take a look at another summary example. This one is a real one. And this is from your classmates joining us from Guam. They've been kind enough to prepare an overview of the key steps of their plan summary to really help us and you all think through your own plan. So as they're showing their slides, please jot down any suggestions or comments you may have, because we're going to give them a little feedback during our group discussion at the end. So Mallory, are you there?
Half a day.
Great. Okay, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you both to you and Whitney. I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, but you have the floor.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for the opportunity to talk with you guys about our project. My name is Mallory Morgan. I'm the National Coral Reef Management Fellow here at the Bureau of Statistics and Plans in Guam, and I'm joined by my supervisor, who is also the previous Coral Fellow, Whitney.
Hi, good to meet you all, I guess. And I am the Coral Reef Resilience Coordinator at the Bureau of Statistics and Plans. And I'm excited for the opportunity to share this project with you, and hopefully you all have some feedback for us.
Cool, so let's just dive in. Next slide, please. So I don't think I need to tell anybody on the webinar exactly how critical reefs are for tourism, but really just wanted to highlight how important tourism is to our country of Guam, and that our economy really truly depends on it. You can see these shocking numbers here. Guam is relatively close to Asia, and it's revered as being America, and also cheaper and closer than Hawaii. So we get a lot of short-term visitors. Despite the fact that we have these really impressive numbers, we've lost coral cover declined by 80% in the last 50 years. And this is a number and a statistic that I'm planning to create a nice clean infographic for which this process reminded me to do. And thinking about the context for our project, what is our jumping off point? We're thinking about the level of buy-in from natural resource managers currently, which is probably fairly low given the fact that they're very busy and they have lots of other things to deal with right now, like climate change and fishing and other issues. And then what is the level of buy-in from our tourism industry, which is also pretty low right now, and there's definitely some potential conflicts that we're going to be working around, for example, fish feeding. But we do have opportunity to highlight economic benefits in this project. Next, please. So you can see our goal and objective here, and I'll let you read it. But I did want to talk about briefly, when designing the goals, something that I encountered and something that I struggled with, which was the measurable piece of a SMART goal. So for me, it felt kind of arbitrary to throw up a percentage of an impact reduction without really having a robust baseline data. So most examples say reduce by 30% or increase by 50. And typically you would have a baseline to quote a quantitative target like that off of. But maybe I was just being too tied to the goal rather than recognizing it simply as that, as a goal. So regardless, we decided to give ourselves a 5-year timeline for this goal. And I think 50% is a good target for that, given the fact that I'm really starting from ground zero. For the objective, I chose the one that was the most timely and needed to happen first, since objectives should set each other up, as in a domino effect. So this was the first objective for this goal that needed to happen to be sure I was designing an effective campaign and bringing my stakeholders along with me from the beginning. I originally had the objective written as, by August 2018, survey and interview 20 marine tour operators, etc. But we learned that you should provide flexibility in your objectives and take out tactics to make it more outcome focused rather than activity based. And that's something that Kristen talked about in the last webinar as well that I found really helpful. So when designing your objective, you should really be thinking big picture and what success will look like, so that you aren't too tied to it and you can adjust as you go. Next slide. So the overarching goal really of my fellowship here on Guam broadly is to reduce impacts of recreational use on Guam's coral reefs. And this really has 4 target audiences, but for purposes of this exercise, I chose to focus on marine tour operators, but I do plan to go back through the communications planning process for the other groups as well, because I found it really helpful. So taking it a few steps further, I refined marine tour operators to be the target, who are the target key decision makers that will actually make the actions happen. So the general managers and owners of the shops I decided to focus on. And it's always important to think about what your target audience's concerns are, which I've listed here. And so in this case, I think that they're concerned about profit, customer safety, customer satisfaction, and existing notions of a successful business model. In our case on Guam, it's fish feeding, unfortunately. But a unique concern that I think dive shop owners also have is coral reefs, and that's a connection that we have as natural resource managers. We both value coral reefs, so that would immediately be our first connection to connect with them with. Other connections we identified is the fact that I worked as a scuba instructor for many years, and Whitney was previously employed by one of the dive shops here on island. So hoping to come to our audience as one of them and one of their peers, and not just as a conservationist. Some potential barriers that we were thinking about might be time. It's a very limited resource in every aspect of life and in every sector, I think. And there's plenty more day-to-day activities that tend to take precedence. Another one is that customer service and satisfaction is really a #1 priority. So sometimes it can be perceived as being prohibitive or limiting by telling customers what not to do, and being really prohibitive on them might be perceived as bad customer service. And typically divers don't think they are the problem. They consider themselves guardians of the reef, and it's easy to blame other people and other reasons for reef health decline, but this is just a classic case of tragedy of the commons. And finally, we know that our dive shops on Guam and probably everywhere else just don't want to be regulated. Next slide, please. So here are the key messages that I came up with. Again, going back to, at first I started the key messages around the goal, but then remembered that I should be crafting the key messages geared towards the objective itself and the target audience. So I went back and rewrote the key messages, not for the goal, but for the audience. So again, to remind you, the target audience here is the owners and general managers of the marine tour operations, whether that's a dive shop or a snorkel operation. And thinking about the message box, what is the issue? What are the problems? Why does it matter to my audience? And what are some solutions and benefits? I found it, through the process, I found it hard to fit all 8 guidelines in one message. And I really like the idea of a short, memorable catchphrase. We used the example in the last webinar, leave paradise in its place. And I really like the idea of something short. So it was hard to encapsulate all those strategies in one phrase, which is something maybe we can talk about. So for mine, I chose the first message, which draws on rationale. It's simple and it highlights the benefits. The second message draws on rationale, a call to action, and the benefits. And it also frames it in a way to say you're not the problem, but your customers are. Next slide, please. So in thinking about messengers and tactics, again, in the context of a target audience, I really found the question that was prompted helpful, which was, who do they respect, who do they listen to, and who do they trust? And even though I was in the industry and worked as an instructor in the dive industry for many years, I still feel like this is a very person-to-person basis and only something that can be uncovered through conversations and relationship building. But some potential messengers that we came up for our objective and our goal was fellow dive shop owners. Another messenger might be a president or CEO of the Guam Visitors Bureau. This is our government agency that's responsible for managing tourism on Guam, and they might be helpful to articulate a strategic plan of where future funding from the government might be headed, such as ecotourism. And then a third messenger obviously would be a tourist or a customer, because this is who our target audience caters to. And I was really excited to see that anecdotes would be an acceptable form of evaluation in the message. So choosing a customer quote maybe that's expressing why they think it's important and why they chose a green dive shop. For tactics, again, thinking about putting the dive shop in a group of peers. So for example, when I worked in climate change in San Diego, we were on a 5-year communications grant with NSF, and our key strategy that we really found over the 5 years to be helpful was putting key decision makers and leaders in a room with other leaders and other peers. So in this case, with other dive shop owners, and making them feel like they're not the only one. A lot of people don't want to be first, but they're willing to be second. So really opening the door for others to act together as a group might encourage action. So also, these are the tactics that we listed, and I don't know if others on the call would have some more insight, but again, thinking back on who do dive shop owners listen to and respect was something interesting this process helped me think through. Next slide, last slide. So measurements, this is always the challenge, I think, but this process was really helpful because, again, we're thinking about measuring the objective. So which is here the objective was engaging the target audience to get their input. And I won't read through all these, but I think the main takeaway that I had through this process was dividing your measurements and your evaluation between outputs and outcomes. And one way to do this is to ask yourself, can I control this? So if you can't control it, it's probably an outcome and a bit more qualitative. If you can control it, it's probably an output and a bit more quantitative. And that was a helpful guideline for me. One thing to note, though, is a big part of this project is really relationship building, and how do you measure that successfully? So that's what I have for you. I'm really looking forward to hearing from others, because I know this is an issue many other jurisdictions are facing, and something we're just now getting to dive into on Guam. And happy, again, can you just go to the next slide, and you've got our email addresses there, and please shoot us any success stories or ideas you might have, and we really appreciate your time. Oh, and don't forget to check out Guam Year of the Reef. We're really excited here on Guam. We're celebrating International Year of the Reef. Hashtag us and follow us and tweet us.
Awesome. Thanks, Mallory, and Whitney, to you too. Thanks for sharing. That was super interesting and very compelling. The photos were great. And you guys nailed it, hitting on so many points that I would have wanted to make. So way to steal the thunder. No, just kidding. I guess in reflecting, and you already did a lot of reflecting in your presentation off and on, so that was excellent, really helpful to participants listening in. But I'd love it if you just shared any surprises that kind of happened along the way when you're writing your plan, or noticed any areas where you need to focus efforts further. Was anything really coming to light or obvious?
Yeah, definitely. And I think some others in the class can relate, because I think some other Coral Fellows are taking the course. But we have to draft a scope of work for the next 2 years for our project. And this process really made me think about everything in the context of my target audience. And it really helped me reorganize my work plan, targeted towards a key audience and thinking about specific objectives, specific tactics and messages through every step of the way. And it really just helped me refine everything at such a smaller scale. So I did actually go back and reorganize my work plan in the context of this audience. And I think it'll be really helpful to go back through the communication planning process for these other three, the hotel industry, the natural resource managers, and the tourists themselves, to do this process. And that was a surprise to totally rework my scope of work, but I think it'll be much more effective.
Oh, good. I hope so. Excellent. That's really exciting and encouraging to hear. Awesome.
And I would add one other surprise, I think, was learning that measurements can be anecdotal and qualitative, and quotes from people, I think, adds a human dimension. And I hadn't heard that too much about how powerful measuring just based off of other people's opinions could be. So that was good to hear.
Totally. Yeah. I find it really powerful. I feel like there's just always a little disclaimer of not overusing it, because then it loses its effect and can kind of tip in the opposite direction. But yeah, it can be very helpful and definitely compelling. Find it very useful.
Okay.
So awesome. I have a couple kind of comments or suggestions, and for those of you also on the phone, please feel free to send in a message or chime in. But I'd love to just point out a couple ideas and give a few pointers or tips based on what you shared, if that's okay.
Please.
Okay. I thought your goal, and well, I won't go back, I'll just read it, but it was a really good goal and very realistic because of how you worded it. So I think you said you want to reduce direct impacts from snorkeling and diving to reefs by 50%. And so to me, that does seem really realistic and doable. You're right that who knows about that 50% number right now. It really is serving as a placeholder. And as you go, you can probably refine that and adjust that as needed. But what's also really great about that goal is that you captured the big picture why you're doing that is to improve reef condition. So you really captured that, but without overcommitting yourself to achieving that. So it's kind of like you almost did like a little baby step or bite-sized chunk in the goal itself. So I thought that was really, really successful. Your messages I thought were great. I liked that you put in that little rationale bit about reefs are in rapid decline, I think was what you had said. I would go a little bit further and share maybe a little bit more detail. I think in the beginning we heard you say some really compelling, well, very sad stats, but about the 80% decline. So maybe even just kind of inserting that number in there somehow to really hit home that this is a big deal and to help bring it to life a little more. But I loved your idea about an infographic. Obviously, I would love infographics, but I thought that was great. And also a really nice mix of messengers as well. I thought it seemed thoughtful. You were clearly looking for really different kinds of people to appeal to different elements of your audience. So I thought that was really successful. For the measures, I will just say, and it was a lot to take in right here, but I would recommend, I love how you're organized at outputs and outcomes. I do that in my planning. It helps me organize my thoughts. I would probably argue, or at least recommend, moving the % increase in coral health and then the increase in dive briefings amongst the operators. So that's the operators are doing the briefings to their customers, correct?
Correct.
Is that right? Okay. So yeah, I would suggest moving those to outcomes, because you actually don't have control over those. Those are kind of like the outcomes of the actions that you're doing. And yeah, so I would just probably move those two over, and maybe I would even make the case that you're jumping ahead and probably don't even need them here right now if you're just linking it back to your specific objectives, because your objective was specifically about about getting buy-in from the operators, right? And having them identify ways that they can participate. So this is great. It's like you're jumping ahead almost to the next objective of having the tour operators implement reef safe practices. So it's awesome, and this is getting into semantics and details, but I would just consider moving it over and then maybe even noting that this is for the next objective, or this is what you're working towards, just so you don't take on measuring too much at once.
That makes sense.
Okay, so that was kind of my initial reaction. It was really excellent project. I'm excited to see where it goes. I would like to, okay, we're going to force participation from this audience now. For those of you with experience creating similar plans, so it can be either this plan or a different kind of plan, but just wondering in terms of implementation, what has been your greatest challenge or barrier to implementing your plan? So there's a poll up on the screen, and if you can share that, share your answer to that. Ooh, we have a tie. No buy-in from supervisors, which is a tough one and very common, which was why we put that up here. And other, which is very mysterious, and not enough funding. Okay, so not that there weren't clear next steps or roles, which means you guys are all amazing at writing your plans. If anyone wants to share an other, I'd love to hear what that is. The no buy-in from supervisors is a big one that we hear from managers a lot, which was one of the reasons why we started doing these summary versions of the plans, was a way to be able to have managers kind of like pitch these plans to their supervisors and make them short and sweet, which is why we emphasize that. At first we were doing these longer plans, and it made it a little bit more complicated to communicate about your communications plan. So this is really meant to be that elevator pitch to get others to buy in and easily get on board with your project, including your supervisors. Not that this is a quick fix to it, but we have found it to be helpful. Okay. Wanting to share their other, that's totally fine. So I am gonna pitch it back to you then, Mallory, and check in with you on your communication challenge and just see if you've either run into it already. It sounds like you do know these audiences, have a good sense of what's happening. So a communication challenge either that you've run into or that you anticipate in your project. Can you share one with us, and maybe we can help brainstorm some ideas?
So something that we've talked about and that I think we're going to face, and we face it for a lot of our coral reef management issues on Guam, is a lack of a legal framework to mandate compliance. So as we're working with these reef safe tour operators, I think our communication and our messaging is of utmost importance, because we can't really require that anybody does anything. And it would be really nice if we could just say, well, if you don't do this, you're going to get a fine. But instead, we've got to really, really focus on this relationship building and messaging and conveying this to, we're natural resource managers, but instead of conveying the conservation perspective, we really have to focus on the economic benefits to the dive shops. So I think that's a challenge, at least for me, and not having that policy framework is a huge obstacle.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you're not the only one in feeling that. I think that this is kind of one of the main reasons why strategic communications is getting more and more popular, is people are really recognizing that behavior change is the way to go. In a lot of places, in a lot of situations, it's kind of the only answer. So for me, I mean, the relationships that you mentioned, I think are key, is building those relationships because, I mean, a number of reasons, but one that's really important to me is it gives you an opportunity to really learn about that audience. So often, well, I guess for me, like the place that I typically start is by trying to understand my audience's motivation. So in your case, really asking those business owners why they're doing what they're doing and understanding their motivations more will really help you try and identify a solution or an incentive, and also try and help uncover some of those barriers. Like, why are they continuing to do this? So I think in this case too, without that lack of the kind of the stick, you really do have to focus more on the carrot. Sorry, bad analogy there, but focusing, going back to what we talked about on identifying those barriers and trying to minimize them and raise up the benefits and incentives, I think is unfortunately the way to go in these situations where there isn't legal framework. Awesome. I mean, not awesome, but thanks for sharing. It looks like we have a question or a comment. Sherry, can you read that to us or see if someone wants to ask it directly? I can't see the whole question.
Sure, yeah. It looks like they're offering a suggestion. Maybe have a study done where the impact of divers has been documented, either local study or internationally, which could help convey the need.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have one study that that I did a couple of years ago on snorkelers in our main marine preserve, and we found that areas with high density of human users had more coral damage. And we're hopefully this spring going to be launching a project at a different area where there's a lot of divers where we can get that data. So I agree, having that baseline is absolutely important to being able to kind of measure our goal.
Awesome. It sounds like you guys have a lot of research and a lot of stats to work with, which is great. I mean, I feel like you're ahead of the game with that. It's just about taking that information and making it compelling, which is the fun part.
I don't know that we feel like we're ahead of the game, but it's nice to hear that we sound that way.
Well, it seems like it from an outside perspective. Okay,
Excellent.
Well, please keep thinking about questions or comments for these guys. Sherry, I want to make sure we have time to get to some of the course wrap up. Do you want to jump to that and we can see if another question comes in?
Sure. Yeah, so thanks everyone for your participation in the course so far. It is our last webinar today. The plan was to have the course still available for you for another week. If you'd like a course certificate, I'll be sending those out to you by email. What is required to get the certificate is to complete all the quizzes, and we have a course survey. And this is the first time we've run the course like this, so we'd really like your input of what has worked for you, maybe any suggestions for improving it. So to get the certificate, please do the quizzes and take the survey. I'll be sending a link out for those, or for the survey after the webinar. And then also we just wanted to let you know that the content that you went through, the planning process on our Reef Resilience Toolkit, is available anytime. So please revisit it as you move forward with your other projects at work. If you have colleagues, please share it with them, get it into their hands, because it's something you can do, on your own as a self-study at any time, and then the worksheets are available for anyone to download. And look for other courses that we have in the future. We don't have any scheduled right now. We'll be having some more coming up, and so you should get some our e-newsletter and webinar announcements. So hopefully you can stay involved with the network in the future. And that's it from me.
Thanks, Sherry. There was a follow-up comment about the snorkeler survey, and it says, excellent, did the snorkelers want to learn more? Maybe this could be used to help them again bend to the client's need. So for Mallory and Whitney.
I don't understand the question. Could you repeat it?
Yep. And for the person that asked it too, feel free, we can unmute you if you want the floor. Doesn't always have to be us talking. It says, excellent. Did the snorkelers want to learn more? So I'm guessing the snorkelers who were surveyed. Maybe this could be used to help them bend or change the client's need.
Yeah, so what we did was we did a we did like a visual survey of density of like a user density in the bay, and then did coral surveys, so looking at like a spatial analysis of where there were the most people, and then what the damage was like along kind of a gradient of human use. We have done some surveys and some like general outreach to tourists, and I think that's going to be another important component of this project. And we kind of have to balance it between reaching out to these natural resource managers who are the dive shop and the marine tour operators and the hotels. So these people who are part of the Guam community and who live here, but we also have, 1.5 million tourists who come in, and their average length of stay is 4 days. So I think we have to balance where do we put our resources with people who are going to be here for 4 days and then leave. But it is the snorkelers and the divers. A lot of these people are tourists, and they're the ones causing this physical damage. So hopefully we will be able to kind of access them and change their behavior through awareness.
Excellent. It sounds like you're really doing a great job of prioritizing target audiences, which is great, and being realistic in terms of thinking long term and who you can begin to have the most kind of impact with first. So that's excellent. And I just want to see, I'm happy to share an idea on one more thing you shared, Mallory and Whitney, but I want to just see, we are going to be wrapping up the course just shortly, and this is our last opportunity. So if anyone has any questions or comments or anything to share, please feel free to do so. I guess maybe I'll just make one more quick comment or observation, and you touched on this earlier, Mallory, when you were talking about kind of the challenge of smashing in a sense, all that information from the message box into a tagline, if you will, or a few words or a simple statement. And I guess I would just think about the use for that and just be really clear in that, because the message box, we can use it in lots of different ways. And oftentimes with a tagline or maybe even like a catchy word, we're really trying to just get our audience's attention. We're not necessarily to try and say all the key messages related to our work. And so the instances where I've seen that be really useful is when it does just that. It's a word or a catchy tagline that gets our audience's attention. And then there's some more information. It depends if it's a print ad or maybe it's on the radio or just in a conversation, where then you follow up with kind of those 4 or 5 points that you want to make, really, that really are the outline of your message box. So I guess I would say, like, don't try and take on too much at once. I feel like if you work really hard to jam all the components of your message box into a word or a few words, it might mean something to you, but might be even more confusing to your target audience. So just kind of balance that, and I would say, sure, challenge yourself, of course, to have a catchy tagline. I love that you were really clear on what you were doing with your messages. You said, oh, this one's for rationale, and this one's the so what. So don't lose that, but I would say don't make it too hard for yourself as well. And there's nothing wrong with having that catchy phrase followed by a few sentences that really hit on your key points.
I'm actually glad you brought that up, because there is one phrase that I kind of came up with that I hope to use throughout this campaign, but there's a challenge. The phrase is reef safe tourism. and reef safe is so attached to sunscreen at this point in the conversation that I did actually want to ask others on the call if they felt like reef safe tourism was an effective label or phrase to move forward with, even though it's used so heavily in the context of sunscreen at the moment.
I was pausing to give someone else a chance. I would say that just like when we were talking about that, the baby carrot example, it's really important to understand that current conversation happening. So I check in with your target audience on this and get a sense of what do they think about reef safe? Do they have any kind of association with it currently? Like, so do they have that association with sunscreen? And if they do have an association, is it a good one or a bad one? Because if it's a bad one, certainly don't touch it and move on and come up with a new one. So just doing a little more digging and understanding how that resonates with your target audience is what I would suggest as a first step. I see that there
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
I see a comment here. It's just a general, I'm going to go ahead and read it though. It says, this process has been super helpful. Figuring out how to communicate with our target audience seemed daunting, but thanks to this course, we're optimistic about successfully reaching our goal. Awesome, thank you. Oh, and it looks like there was one other one right here saying dive, so this is going back to the previous topic, and dive briefings are important. Have you had yours? It was an exclamation, not a question mark. So I think it was encouraging, not a question.
Or maybe was that a message?
Oh, you're right. That's what it probably was. Oh, reefs make tourism. Oh, you are getting messages idea, and yep, it said yes message. Okay, we're having lots of questions come in there, but I am going to go ahead and wrap up since we are at the top of our hour. We went a little bit longer, but we're going to keep the online discussion group on the network forum open. We'll go ahead and keep that open indefinitely. So please, as you think of other ideas for Mallory and Whitney or other comments for your fellow classmates, please feel free to share them there. We want to keep the discussion going. And though it's not required, once you've completed the summary of your plan, feel free to post it in our discussion group. And that way you can share and inspire others and get ideas from each other. So thank you guys once again for your participation throughout the course. Thank you to Mallory and Whitney for being excellent sharers and guinea pigs, if you will. We really appreciate it. It's been a really fun course. So Sherry, I'll speak for you too. We hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful. So thank you and goodbye, and look forward to continuing the conversation on the network forum. Thanks, everyone.